The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and broken dreams. Outside, I could hear the familiar sounds of our small Indiana town winding down for the evening, pickup trucks rumbling past on Main Street, the distant whistle of the 6 p.m. freight train that ran through the edge of Madison County. Inside this sterile room, though, time had stopped completely. My daughter's tiny body felt impossibly light in my arms. 7 pounds, 3 ounces when she was born just 2 hours ago. Now she felt like she weighed nothing at all, as if she might float away if I loosened my grip even slightly. The nurses had wrapped her in a soft pink blanket, one of those standard-issue hospital blankets that thousands of babies get wrapped in every day. But this blanket wasn't keeping her warm anymore. It was just there. Dr. Walker had used words like unforeseen complications and did everything we could. His voice had that practiced gentleness that doctors develop when delivering the worst news imaginable. My wife Sarah sat in the chair beside the bed, silent tears streaming down her face, her body still recovering from labor, her arms empty when they should have been full. They'd given us time. That's what they call it in hospitals. Time. As if minutes could somehow compensate for the lifetime we'd already planned. I'd memorized every detail of my daughter's face, the delicate curve of her nose, the tiny fingernails like translucent shells, the wisps of dark hair that reminded me of Sarah's baby pictures. I'd counted her fingers and toes twice, pressed my lips to her forehead, whispered everything I'd never get to tell her. This was goodbye. In a few moments, I would have to hand her back to the nurses, and they would take her away, and that would be that. 22 years old, working at my father's hardware store, living in the same town where 5 generations of our family had lived and died, and now I was saying goodbye to the 6th generation before she'd even had a chance to say hello. I pulled her closer one last time, feeling the weight of all those lost tomorrows pressing down on my chest. And then everything changed. Because in that impossible moment, in that small-town hospital room where hope had gone to die, my daughter took a breath. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and smash the like if this story is gripping you. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read them all. Now back to what happened next. They say miracles don't happen anymore. That in our age of science and technology, of monitors that beep and machines that breathe for us, there's no room left for the inexplicable. But I'm here to tell you that on a cool September evening in a small Indiana hospital, I witnessed something that no doctor could explain, no textbook could account for, and no amount of medical training could have prepared anyone for. This isn't a story about faith healing or divine intervention, though believe me, I prayed harder in those moments than I ever had in my life. This isn't about medical negligence or misdiagnosis, because Dr. Walker and his team did everything right. They followed every protocol, checked every vital sign, tried every possible intervention. This is simply a story about what happened when all hope was gone, when every expert in the room had delivered their verdict, and when a father held his daughter for what he believed was the last time. In small-town America, everyone knows everyone. Word travels fast through diners and church pews, across pharmacy counters and hardware store aisles. By the time Sarah went into labor that September afternoon, half of Madison County already knew we were at the hospital. By the time the complications began, prayer chains had started at 3 different churches, and by the time Dr. Walker told us there was nothing more they could do, our families were gathered in the waiting room, preparing for the worst. But what happened next wasn't something that could be explained by prayers or medical intervention or anything else that made logical sense. What happened next defied every natural law, every statistical probability, every reasonable expectation. And it all began with a single impossible breath. A breath that would change not just our lives, but challenge everything I thought I knew about the boundaries between life and death. The monitors had gone silent 20 minutes ago. That's what I remember most clearly. Not the chaos that came before, not the frantic voices of nurses calling codes I didn't understand, but the terrible quiet that followed. In the movies, they always show the flat line, that single sustained note that signals the end. Real life isn't like that. Real life is just machines being turned off, one by one, until there's nothing left but the sound of your own breathing and the weight of a child who will never breathe again. Sarah had stopped crying. That scared me more than anything else. She just sat there, staring at the wall where someone had hung a generic landscape painting. Rolling hills and a red barn that looked nothing like the real barns dotting our county. Her hands were folded in her lap, and I could see her lips moving slightly. Maybe she was praying. Maybe she was just trying to remember how to exist in a world where our daughter didn't. The nurse who'd helped deliver our baby, Linda, her name tag said, though I'd already forgotten it twice, stood by the door with her hands clasped in front of her. She'd seen this before. You could tell by the way she held herself, professional but not detached, present but not intrusive. She was giving us space while making sure we weren't alone. I appreciated that, even though I couldn't find the words to tell her. My daughter's face was peaceful. Everyone says that, I know. It's what people say when they're trying to find something beautiful in something unbearable. But it was true. Her features had relaxed in a way they hadn't been during those first desperate hours, when the medical team had worked over her tiny body with an intensity that bordered on violence. Now she just looked like she was sleeping, like I could put her down in a crib and she'd wake up in a few hours hungry and crying. I traced my finger along her cheek, memorizing the texture of her skin. She had a small birthmark near her left ear, shaped almost like a star. Sarah had pointed it out right after delivery, before everything went wrong, and we'd laughed about it. Sarah said it meant our daughter was destined for greatness. I'd said it meant she'd have an easy time remembering which earring went in which ear. Stupid jokes, the kind new parents make when they're giddy with exhaustion and joy and terror. Doctor. Walker had left the room, but I could see him through the window, talking with another doctor in the hallway. His shoulders were slumped in a way that made him look older than he probably was. He'd been our family doctor since I was in high school, had treated my father's diabetes, had delivered 3 of my cousin's babies. This would stay with him, I realized. Not just another day at work, not just another loss in a career full of them. This would be one he remembered. Time felt strange, elastic. I couldn't tell if I'd been holding my daughter for 5 minutes or 50. The clock on the wall said 7:43, but that couldn't be right. It had been 7:43 for at least an hour. Or maybe I was just losing my mind, which seemed like a reasonable response to having your entire future erased in the span of an afternoon. My phone had been buzzing in my pocket. I'd felt it, but ignored it. Text messages from my mother, probably, or Sarah's sister, or friends from church who'd heard the news. Everyone would want updates. Everyone would want to know what they could do, how they could help, what we needed. What we needed was our daughter alive, and since nobody could give us that, there was nothing else worth asking for. I started humming without realizing it, a lullaby my own mother had sung to me, something about mockingbirds and diamond rings. The words seemed cruel now, promises of things that would never be bought, gifts that would never be given. But I kept humming anyway because the alternative was silence, and silence felt too much like agreement, like acceptance, like the final period at the end of a sentence that should have gone on for decades. That's when I felt it. The smallest movement against my chest. So slight I thought I'd imagined it, a phantom sensation conjured by desperate hope. But then it came again, stronger this time. A flutter. A twitch. And then my daughter's chest rose, just barely, drawing in air that shouldn't have been possible. Her mouth opened, and she took a breath. A real, rattling, miraculous breath that shattered every certainty the doctors had given us. The sound that came out of my throat wasn't words. It was something primal, a noise I didn't know I could make. Sarah's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide. And in that fraction of a second, I saw her go from grief to confusion, to something that might have been hope, but was too fragile to name. I held our daughter out toward the light, toward Sarah, toward anyone who could confirm that I wasn't hallucinating, that this was really happening. "She's breathing," I managed to say, though my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "Sarah, she's breathing." Linda was across the room in an instant, her professional composure cracking as she reached for the baby. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency even as her face showed pure shock. She placed 2 fingers against our daughter's neck, checking for a pulse that shouldn't have existed. Her eyes met mine, and I saw something in them that scared me almost as much as the past hour had. Confusion mixed with disbelief, mixed with something that looked almost like fear. "Dr. Walker," Linda called out, her voice steady despite everything. "Dr. Walker, you need to come back in here right now." Through the window, I saw him turn, saw the expression on his face shift from weary resignation to sharp concern. He pushed through the door with the other doctor right behind him, and both of them stopped dead when they saw Linda holding our daughter, saw the tiny chest rising and falling with unmistakable breath. "That's not possible," the other doctor said, not arguing, just stating a fact, because it wasn't possible. They'd checked everything. They'd tried everything. They'd pronounced time of death at 7:17 p.m. I remembered that now. Remembered Dr. Walker's quiet voice saying those words while I'd stood there feeling like the floor had opened up beneath me. Dr. Walker took our daughter from Linda's arms with a gentleness that made my throat tight. He listened to her chest with his stethoscope, his expression growing more bewildered with each second. "I'm hearing a heartbeat," he said slowly. "Slow, but present, and she's taking spontaneous breaths." "How?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. She'd moved to the edge of the bed, was trying to stand despite the nurse who'd appeared from somewhere to help her. "How is that possible?" Nobody answered because nobody had an answer. "Doctor." Walker was already calling for equipment, for the team to reassemble, for the NICU to be prepared. The room that had been a tomb 5 minutes ago was suddenly full of motion, full of voices, full of life responding to life. I stood there uselessly, my empty arms still shaped around the weight of my daughter. I could feel the phantom pressure of her body against my chest, could still smell the combination of hospital soap and something indefinably infant about her. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clasp them together to make it stop. "Mr. Harrison," Linda said, touching my shoulder, "you should sit down." But I couldn't sit down. If I sat down, if I relaxed for even a second, maybe this would all reverse. Maybe this was just a cruel intermission before the real ending, a false hope that would make the final goodbye even worse. So I stood there, watching my daughter disappear into a cluster of medical professionals, watching monitors get plugged back in, watching impossible things happen in real time. Sarah was crying again, but these tears sounded different. They came with gasping breaths and sounds that might have been laughter, or might have been hysteria, or might have been both. Her mother had appeared in the doorway. When had she gotten here? And was holding Sarah's hand while also staring at the scene unfolding with the same shell-shocked expression we all wore. The monitors came back to life. Not with the steady, strong signals of a healthy newborn, but with something. Proof of existence. Proof that the laws of nature weren't as fixed as we'd believed. The beeping was irregular, concerning, but it was there. Each beep was a heartbeat that shouldn't have been happening. A second of life stolen back from death. "Oxygen saturation is low," one of the nurses called out. 62%. "Get her on supplemental oxygen," Dr. Walker ordered. "And someone call County General. We need their neonatal transport team here yesterday." The organized chaos continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. They worked with renewed urgency, no longer fighting to save a life, but to stabilize one that had somehow returned on its own. I caught fragments of medical jargon, words like hypoxia and cardiac function and neurological assessment, but none of it made sense. None of it explained what I'd felt, that moment when my daughter had simply decided to start breathing again. Dr. Walker finally stepped back from the cluster around the warming table where they'd placed our daughter. He looked at me, then at Sarah, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked completely lost. "I don't have an explanation for this," he said. "Everything we observed, every test we ran, every indication we had, she was gone. I've been practicing medicine for 26 years and I have never seen anything like this." "But she's alive now?" Sarah asked, needing to hear it confirmed. "She's alive now," Dr. Walker agreed. "Unstable, critically so, but alive. We're going to transport her to County General's NICU. They have equipment and specialists we don't have here. But Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, I need you to understand, we don't know what happened, which means we don't know what's going to happen next. The ambulance bay was behind the hospital, accessible through a series of corridors that all looked identical in the fluorescent lighting. A nurse, not Linda, someone new whose name I didn't catch, led us through the maze while another nurse pushed Sarah in a wheelchair, despite her protests that she could walk. Hospital policy, they said. Everything was policy now, rules and procedures designed to create order out of chaos. Our daughter was already in the ambulance when we got there, surrounded by equipment that looked too large and complex for someone so small. A paramedic I recognized from high school, Derek something, he'd been 2 years ahead of me, was adjusting an IV line while talking into a radio, coordinating with the receiving hospital. He nodded at me, but didn't smile. Nobody was smiling. This wasn't a happy ending yet. This was just a different kind of crisis. One parent can ride with her, Derek said. The other will need to follow in a separate vehicle. Sarah and I looked at each other. In that moment, I saw 22 years of my life reflected in her eyes. High school sweethearts, prom dates, the secret makeout sessions behind the football stadium, the wedding at First Baptist with half the town in attendance, the tiny apartment above the hardware store where we'd started our married life. All of it leading to this moment, this impossible choice about who would ride in an ambulance with our daughter who'd been dead and was now alive. You go, I said. I'll follow. Sarah nodded, understanding without needing explanation. She was still recovering from delivery, still needed to be near our daughter in case anything happened. I couldn't finish that thought. Wouldn't let myself imagine another ending after we'd already survived one. They helped Sarah into the ambulance, securing her on a bench seat near the head of the stretcher where our daughter lay. Through the open doors, I could see our baby's face, still peaceful, still impossibly small. A breathing tube had been inserted, and the oxygen mask made her look even more fragile than before. But her chest was rising and falling with mechanical assistance now, and that counted as progress. That counted as life. We're taking Highway 37 to County General, Derek told me. Should be about 40 minutes with lights and sirens. Drive safe, okay? Don't try to keep up with us. I nodded, though I knew I'd be pushing every speed limit the entire way. My truck was in the parking lot where I'd left it 6 hours ago, when we'd first arrived for what was supposed to be a routine delivery. 6 hours. That's all it had taken for my entire world to end, and then somehow start again. The ambulance doors closed with a metallic thunk that echoed across the empty bay. Red and blue lights started rotating, painting the concrete walls in alternating colors. Then they were moving, pulling out onto County Road 15, the siren wailing into the night. I watched until the lights disappeared around a corner, then ran for my truck. The parking lot was mostly empty now. Visiting hours had ended. The second shift had gone home. Madison County Regional Hospital settled into its night routine, quiet and efficient, while somewhere inside a doctor was probably still trying to figure out what had happened in room 347. I didn't envy him that task. How do you write a medical report that says patient deceased, then spontaneously revived for reasons unknown? My hands shook as I tried to get the key in the ignition. It took 3 attempts. The truck, a 2015 Ford F-150 that had been my father's before he'd passed it down to me, rumbled to life. The radio came on automatically, some country station playing a song about tractors and beer, absurdly normal. I turned it off. Couldn't handle normal right now. The drive to County General usually took 45 minutes. I made it in 32, following the same route the ambulance had taken. Highway 37 was empty this time of night. Just me and the occasional semi-truck hauling goods to somewhere more important than Madison County. The landscape rolled past, cornfields ready for harvest, farmhouses with lights on in kitchen windows, the distant glow of the county seat on the horizon. I called my mother from the truck. She answered on the first ring, which meant she'd been sitting with her phone in her hand, waiting. "Mom," I said, and then couldn't figure out how to explain what had happened. How do you tell someone that their granddaughter died and then came back to life? "Is she?" my mother started, then stopped. She couldn't finish the question either. "She's alive," I said. "I don't know how, but she's alive." "We're going to County General." The sound my mother made was somewhere between a sob and a prayer. "I'll call everyone," she said. "We'll be right behind you." Everyone meant the whole family. My two sisters, Sarah's parents and sister, probably half the congregation from church. In small towns, crisis brings people together. By morning, there would be casseroles in our apartment, offers to help with anything we needed, a network of support that would either be comforting or suffocating depending on the day. County General Hospital sat on the eastern edge of the county seat, a sprawling complex that made our local hospital look like a clinic. I'd been here once before, when my father had his heart attack. He'd survived that one, lived another 6 years before the second one took him. I wondered if he'd been scared, lying in a hospital bed knowing his body had betrayed him. I wondered if my daughter was scared now, if some part of her understood what had happened. The emergency entrance was clearly marked, but I followed signs for the NICU instead. A security guard at the desk directed me to the 3rd floor, checked my ID, gave me a visitor badge that felt like a permission slip to see my own child. The elevator played soft instrumental music that might have been a Beatles song. Everything felt surreal, like I'd stepped sideways into a reality that didn't quite match the one I'd left. Sarah was in a consultation room when I found her, still in the wheelchair, talking with a doctor whose name tag identified her as Dr. Reeves, neonatal intensive care. Through the window I could see the NICU, rows of incubators and warming tables, each one containing a baby who'd started life with complications. Our daughter was in there somewhere, another impossible story among many difficult ones. "Mr. Harrison," Dr. Reeves said, standing to shake my hand. "Your daughter is stable for now. We've got her on a ventilator and we're running tests to assess her neurological function and organ viability. I've been speaking with Dr. Walker, and I have to say, this is the most unusual case I've encountered in 15 years of neonatal medicine." "But she's alive," I said, needing to hear it confirmed again. "She's alive," Dr. Reeves agreed. "Against all medical probability, yes. Now we need to figure out why, and more importantly, what happens next." The NICU at County General operated on a different rhythm than the rest of the hospital. Even at night, the lights stayed bright, the activity never fully stopped. Babies didn't follow visiting hours or shift changes. They existed in their own urgent timeline, and the staff moved around them with a quiet efficiency that spoke of years handling fragile lives. Dr. Reeves led us to an incubator in the corner. "Isolette number 7, the placard said. Our daughter lay inside, dwarfed by the machinery keeping her alive. Tubes and wires connected her to monitors that beeped and hummed, translating her vital signs into numbers I didn't understand, but watched obsessively anyway. Her chest rose and fell with the ventilator's mechanical rhythm. Nothing like the spontaneous breath I'd felt against my chest an hour ago. "We're keeping her sedated," Dr. Reeves explained, pulling up a rolling stool. "Her body needs rest after what it's been through. The ventilator is doing the work of breathing for her while we figure out what her lungs can handle on their own." Sarah reached through the incubator's portal, her hand hovering over our daughter's tiny fist. She was afraid to touch, I could tell. Afraid that contact might somehow reverse the miracle, send our baby back to wherever she'd been during those 26 minutes when her heart had stopped beating. "You can touch her," Dr. Reeves said gently. "It's good for her, actually. Premature and compromised infants respond well to parental contact." Sarah's fingers finally made contact with our daughter's hand. The baby's fist opened slightly, then closed again, a reflexive movement that might have meant nothing or might have meant everything. Sarah made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. I wanted to ask the questions piling up in my mind. What caused this? Will it happen again? What kind of damage did those 26 minutes do? But the words stuck in my throat because I was terrified of the answers. Sometimes not knowing felt safer than knowing something you couldn't fix. Dr. Reeves seemed to understand. "We're running a full neurological workup," she said. "MRI, EEG, the works. We need to assess what kind of oxygen deprivation occurred and whether there's been any brain damage. I won't lie to you. The prognosis for infants who've experienced cardiac arrest is often poor. But your daughter has already defied every statistical probability, so I'm hesitant to make predictions." When will you know? I asked. Some things we'll know in hours. Others might take days or weeks. Brain injury isn't always immediately apparent in newborns. We'll be watching her carefully, running regular assessments as she grows. The word grows hit me harder than it should have. It implied a future, time stretching forward, birthdays and first steps and all the ordinary miracles of childhood. An hour ago, I'd been holding my daughter goodbye. Now I was being asked to imagine her growing. A different nurse appeared, male, which surprised me for some reason, with a neat beard and kind eyes. "Dr. Reeves, we've got the MRI scheduled for 4 a.m. Radiology just confirmed." 4 in the morning. I checked my watch. It was barely past 9. 7 hours felt like an eternity and no time at all. 7 hours to wait before we'd know if our daughter's brain had survived those minutes without oxygen. "You should both try to rest," Dr. Reeves said, though her tone suggested she knew we wouldn't. "There's a family waiting room down the hall with a couch that folds out. We'll come get you if anything changes, and you can come back here anytime you want." But I couldn't leave. Couldn't walk away from that incubator even for the few minutes it would take to find the waiting room. What if something happened while I was gone? What if she needed me and I wasn't there? The rational part of my brain knew I couldn't do anything to help, that the machines and doctors were far more capable than I was. The father part didn't care about rational. Sarah's mother arrived first, bursting through the NICU doors with Sarah's father right behind her. They'd made the drive from their farm in 40 minutes, probably breaking every traffic law on the books. Sarah's mother went straight to the incubator, her hand flying to her mouth when she saw her granddaughter hooked up to all those machines. "Oh, sweet Jesus," she whispered. "Oh, my baby girl." She meant Sarah, I realized. Even grown and married and a mother herself, Sarah was still her baby girl, and watching your child suffer was its own kind of agony. Sarah stood and fell into her mother's arms, and they held each other while Sarah's father stood awkwardly nearby, the way men of his generation often did when confronted with emotions they didn't know how to express. My own family showed up 20 minutes later. My mother, my sisters Rachel and Beth, my brother-in-law Tom. The NICU had strict rules about visitors, but somehow everyone talked their way in. Or maybe the staff just understood that enforcing policy seemed cruel under the circumstances. We clustered around Isolette 7 like pilgrims at a shrine, each of us needing to see proof that the impossible had happened. "She's beautiful," my mother said, though all any of us could really see was medical equipment and a tiny face half obscured by tubes. But that's what grandmothers do. They find beauty in the wreckage, hope in the disaster. Rachel, always the practical one, had thought to bring coffee and sandwiches from the cafeteria. I hadn't realized I was hungry until I smelled the food. Hadn't thought about anything as mundane as eating. But my body had its own needs independent of the crisis. So I ate mechanically while watching the monitors, memorizing the pattern of numbers that meant my daughter was alive. Time crawled. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting equipment, making notes on charts. Dr. Reeves disappeared to handle other patients but checked in every hour. The NICU never got quiet, but it settled into a kind of subdued hum, the sound of multiple small emergencies being managed simultaneously. Around midnight, most of our family left. Visiting hours were long over, and the staff was getting firmer about enforcement. My mother kissed my forehead like I was 10 years old again, promised to come back first thing in the morning. Sarah's parents stayed longer, her mother clearly reluctant to leave her daughter in a hospital for the second time that day. Finally, it was just Sarah and me and the night shift nurses and a dozen tiny patients fighting their own battles. Sarah had moved to the recliner someone had brought in, her eyes closed but her body still tense. I knew she wasn't sleeping. Neither of us would sleep tonight. I pulled my chair closer to the incubator and placed my palm flat against the clear plastic, as close to my daughter as I could get without actually touching her. Through the barrier, I could see her chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. Alive. Impossible, unexplainable, statistically improbable. But alive. That's when the monitor alarm went off, a sharp electronic shriek that sent every nurse in the unit running toward Isolette 7. The numbers on the screen were dropping. I didn't understand all of them, but I understood falling numbers were bad. Oxygen saturation dropping from 86 to 79 to 72. Heart rate climbing from 140 to 165 to 180. Too fast, like an engine revving out of control. "She's desatting," one nurse called out, already reaching into the incubator to check the ventilator connections. "Doctor," Reeves materialized from somewhere, still in her white coat but with her hair pulled back differently, like she'd been catching a few minutes of sleep in an on-call room. Her hands moved over our daughter with practiced speed, checking, assessing, making decisions I couldn't follow. "Increase oxygen to 100%, she ordered, "and get me a chest x-ray. I want to rule out pneumothorax." Sarah was on her feet, gripping my arm hard enough to leave marks. "What's happening? What's wrong?" "Her oxygen levels are dropping," Dr. Reeves said without looking away from our daughter. "Could be a dozen different things. We're working on it." But working on it meant watching numbers continue to fall, watching my daughter's skin take on a bluish tint even under the warming lights. The ventilator's rhythm changed. Faster, more aggressive, forcing air into lungs that weren't cooperating. Someone rolled in a portable x-ray machine, maneuvering it into position over the incubator. "Clear," the radiology tech called, and everyone stepped back while the machine hummed and clicked. The image appeared on a monitor seconds later. Dr. Reeves studied it, her expression unreadable. "Left lung looks compressed, could be fluid, could be a tension pneumothorax. I need to do a needle decompression." She was already scrubbing her hands, already pulling on fresh gloves. A nurse appeared with a tray of instruments that looked too large, too brutal for someone so small. I wanted to look away but couldn't. This was my daughter. If she had to endure this, the least I could do was bear witness. "You might want to step out," Dr. Reeves said, finally glancing at us. "No," Sarah said firmly. "We're staying." Dr. Reeves nodded like she'd expected that answer. She opened the incubator's side panel, exposing our daughter's tiny chest. The baby's ribs were visible under paper-thin skin, rising and falling with the ventilator's rhythm. Dr. Reeves felt along the ribs with her fingers, counting spaces, finding landmarks. "Hold her steady," she told the nurse. Then she inserted the needle between two ribs, and I had to grip the back of a chair to keep from swaying. There was a hiss of escaping air, and suddenly the monitor numbers started climbing again. Oxygen saturation rising from 64 to 71 to 82. Heart rate slowing from 190 to 170 to 152. "There we go," Dr. Reeves said quietly. "Tension pneumothorax. The lung collapsed and was putting pressure on everything else. We'll need to insert a chest tube to keep it inflated, but she should stabilize now." Should. That word carried so much weight. Should meant probably, meant most likely, meant we hope but can't promise. I'd learned to hate that word over the past few hours. The procedure took another 20 minutes. The chest tube was a thin plastic catheter that snaked between our daughter's ribs and connected to a collection chamber that would drain any fluid or air from around her lung. More equipment, more tubes, more things that could go wrong. But the numbers stabilized. Oxygen saturation held steady at 88%. Heart rate settled into a rhythm that looked almost normal on the monitor. The blue tint faded from our daughter's skin, replaced by the pale pink that meant blood was flowing. Oxygen was circulating. Life was continuing. Dr. Reeves stripped off her gloves and tossed them in the biohazard bin. "That was concerning," she admitted, "but not unexpected. Newborns who've been through what your daughter has often have pulmonary complications. The lung tissue was compromised during the period of cardiac arrest, and it's fragile now. We'll monitor her closely." "Will it happen again?" I asked. "Possibly. She's not out of the woods yet, Mr. Harrison. The next 72 hours are critical. We're dealing with multiple organ systems that were deprived of oxygen and are now trying to recover. There will likely be more complications. More complications, more alarms, more moments of watching numbers fall and wondering if this was it, if the miracle had finally run out." I felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep, and everything to do with the emotional whiplash of the past 8 hours. Sarah sank back into the recliner, her face pale. She'd started bleeding again. I could see the stain spreading on the hospital gown she still wore. The nurse noticed too, was already moving toward her with concern. "Mrs. Harrison, I think you need to be evaluated. That's more bleeding than I'd expect at this point postpartum." "I'm fine," Sarah said, but her voice was weak. "You're not fine," the nurse said gently but firmly. "Your body just went through a traumatic delivery, and you've been running on adrenaline ever since. Let me call someone from obstetrics to check you out." Sarah started to protest, but I cut her off. "Go," I said. "I'll stay with her. I won't leave." "Promise?" "Promise." They wheeled Sarah away in a wheelchair, and I was alone with our daughter again. Alone except for the nurses moving through the NICU. Alone except for the machines keeping my baby alive. Alone except for the weight of everything that had happened and everything that might still happen. I rested my head against the incubator, the plastic cool against my forehead. "You have to keep fighting," I whispered. "We need you. Your mom needs you. I need you. So whatever this is, whatever's happening in that tiny body of yours, you have to keep fighting." The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. The ventilator hissed and clicked, and somewhere under all that machinery, my daughter's heart kept beating, a heart that had stopped and started again, defying every law of medicine and nature. If she could do that, maybe she could do this too. Maybe she could survive long enough for the doctors to figure out how to help her. Or maybe I was just telling myself fairy tales because the alternative was unbearable. Either way, I wasn't leaving that incubator. Not tonight, not until I knew she was safe. 3 years have passed since that September night. My daughter, we named her Grace because what else could we call her, is asleep upstairs right now, clutching the stuffed rabbit her grandmother gave her. She's healthy, bright, completely normal according to every test and evaluation. The doctors never did figure out what happened. Dr. Walker calls it a spontaneous recovery. Dr. Reeves prefers unexplained medical phenomenon. I just call it a miracle. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night and go to her room, just to watch her breathe. Sarah thinks I'm being paranoid, but she does it too. We both do, because we know something most parents don't. How fragile the line is between here and gone. How quickly everything can change. How little control we actually have over the things that matter most. Grace starts preschool next month. She's excited about the backpack we bought her, purple with butterflies on it. She doesn't know her own story yet, doesn't understand that she shouldn't be here. Maybe we'll tell her someday, when she's old enough to understand. Or maybe we'll just let her live her impossible life, without the weight of knowing how close she came to never living it at all. Either way, every breath she takes is still a miracle, and I'm still counting every single one.